Pontiac wasn't supposed to do this. Inside General Motors, there was one unspoken rule everyone understood. No matter how fast or wild things got, nothing was allowed to upstage the Corvette. That car was sacred, and yet, right at the end of the third-generation Firebird's life, Pontiac quietly unleashed something that shattered that rule. The Pontiac Firehawk wasn't a concept car, and it wasn't a tuner build done in someone's garage. It was a factory-backed, dealer-sold Firebird that could run with, and in some cases embarrass, contemporary Corvettes, including cars that cost just as much or more. It had supercar-level acceleration, serious hardware pulled straight from racing and exotic catalogs, and a price tag that made buyers stop and think twice. If you like the stories where manufacturers bend the rules, push boundaries, and accidentally create legends in the process, you're going to want to stay with this one. And subscribing means you won't miss stories like this going forward. To understand how Pontiac even pulled this off, we need to look at where the Firebird stood in the early 1990s, and why the stage was set for something extreme. The Firebird at a crossroads. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the third-generation Firebird was in a strange place. When it debuted back in 1982, it looked futuristic and sharp, and it helped define the performance look of the decade. But by 1990, the platform was long in the tooth. Underneath the styling tweaks and special editions, the bones were nearly a decade old. Performance hadn't exactly kept pace with expectations either. Emissions regulations and fuel economy targets meant that even V8 Firebirds were struggling to crack impressive power figures. On paper, they were fun, but they weren't setting the world on fire, especially not in a marketplace where the Corvette ZR-1 had just arrived and was rewriting what an American performance car could be. Pontiac knew the third-gen Firebird's days were numbered. A new generation was on the way, but there was still time for one last statement. Something bold, something that reminded people what Pontiac stood for when it came to performance. The answer wasn't going to come from a typical factory refresh. It was going to come from outside the usual rulebook, and from a company that specialized in making street-legal cars far more serious than they had any right to be. SLP, the secret ingredient. That company was Street Legal Performance, better known as SLP. Founded by Ed Hamburger, SLP had built its reputation doing something most manufacturers struggled with: delivering real performance gains while staying emissions legal and warranty-friendly. In an era when bolt-on parts often meant compromises, SLP figured out how to make speed reliable. SLP focused heavily on GM's third-gen platforms, especially the Camaro and Firebird. Their early performance packages delivered massive gains over stock, sometimes as much as 50 extra horsepower, using revised intake systems, freer-flowing exhausts, and carefully recalibrated engine management. And importantly, these weren't backyard modifications. They were engineered, tested, and legal in all 50 states. Pontiac noticed. They saw an opportunity to do something radical without officially breaking internal rules. Instead of advertising a factory Corvette rival, Pontiac could offer a dealer-ordered special, a Firebird transformed by SLP, sold new and backed by a warranty. This partnership gave SLP access to GM resources, including proving grounds, and allowed them to go far beyond simple bolt-ons. What they were building wasn't just a faster Firebird, it was a fully re-engineered performance machine, one that would soon be known as the Firehawk. And once you look at what SLP did to the engine, it becomes clear why this Firebird crossed lines it was never meant to cross. The engine that changed everything. At the heart of the Firehawk was an engine that looked familiar on paper, but was anything but ordinary in execution. SLP started with GM's 350 cubic inch L98 small block V8, the same basic engine you'd find in other performance-oriented GM products of the era. But nearly everything about it was reworked. The bottom end was strengthened with forged internals, robust engine parts like pistons and connecting rods made from forged metal designed to survive sustained high loads, not just quick bursts of acceleration. The cylinder heads were ported for better airflow, the intake system was revised, and a free-flowing exhaust allowed the engine to breathe in a way stock Firebirds simply couldn't. This wasn't about peak numbers alone. It was about building an engine that could deliver power consistently and reliably. The result was staggering for the time. While a standard L98 Firebird made a little over 200 horsepower, the Firehawk's V8 produced roughly 350 horsepower and close to 400 pound-feet of torque. Those weren't inflated brochure figures either. Period testing backed them up, and more importantly, the torque delivery was immediate and relentless. Power alone wasn't enough, though. To make use of it, SLP paired the engine with a 6-speed manual transmission sourced directly from the C4 Corvette, something you couldn't even order in a standard 3rd-gen Firebird with a V8. An aluminum drive shaft, upgraded axles, and a Dana 44 rear differential completed a drivetrain designed to survive abuse. This wasn't a warmed-over muscle car. It was a Firebird, rebuilt from the crankshaft, back with one goal in mind: performance without excuses. Performance that put Corvettes on notice. When the Firehawk hit the road, the numbers did the talking. With a curb weight of around 3,400 pounds and all that torque on tap, the car could sprint from 0 to 60 in the mid-4-second range, rip through the quarter-mile in the low 13 seconds, and keep pulling well past speeds most Firebirds were never meant to see. Top speed hovered around 160 miles per hour, squarely in Corvette territory. That's where things got uncomfortable inside GM. These weren't just impressive Firebird stats, these were base C4 Corvette killing numbers, and in some situations, the Firehawk ran neck and neck with the far more expensive Corvette ZR-1. Optional upgrades pushed the car even further. Buyers willing to spend more could spec serious hardware, including 4-piston brake calipers derived from the Ferrari F40, wider tires at all 4 corners, and track-focused additions like harnesses and a roll bar. Grip improved dramatically, though comfort took a back seat, and intentionally so. Period testers were clear about one thing: the Firehawk wasn't refined. The ride was stiff, the cabin was noisy, and the experience was raw. But that was the point. This wasn't a luxury performance car, it was a turnkey, street-legal hot rod sold through a dealership. And if you're enjoying uncovering cars GM never really wanted you to know about, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps keep stories like this alive. Why the Firehawk is so rare? With all that performance, you'd think the Firehawk would have been a hit. But timing and reality had other plans. By the early 1990s, the 3rd-generation Firebird platform was clearly nearing the end of its life. Buyers knew a new generation was coming, and spending $40,000 to over $50,000 on a heavily modified version of an aging car was a hard sell, especially when the Corvette ZR-1 sat in the same price neighborhood with factory backing and heavy marketing. The Firehawk's unique status didn't help either. It wasn't a regular production Pontiac model. It was a dealer-ordered SLP conversion, which meant limited exposure and zero mainstream advertising. Even many Pontiac enthusiasts didn't know it existed at the time. SLP originally planned to build around 250 3rd-gen Firehawks. In reality, only about 25 were ever completed between 1991 and 1992. Most were red, though a handful slipped out in other colors, making some examples even rarer. That tiny production number turned the Firehawk into an instant obscurity, but also a future legend. It was too expensive, too extreme, and too unconventional to succeed in its moment. And that's exactly why it's remembered today. The Firehawk's legacy. For years after its brief production run, the 3rd-generation Firehawk lived in the shadows. It wasn't widely advertised when new, it wasn't produced in meaningful numbers, and it didn't benefit from the same factory hype as the Corvette ZR-1. But time has a way of reshuffling the deck. Today, the Firehawk is recognized for what it truly was, one of the most extreme factory-backed performance cars GM ever allowed to exist. It represented a moment when corporate rules loosened just enough for something wild to slip through. A Firebird that could genuinely challenge Corvettes wasn't supposed to happen, and yet it did. Collectors now view these cars very differently. With roughly 25 examples ever built, the Firehawk is rarer than many homologation specials and limited-run exotics. And unlike garage-built tuner cars, its performance credentials were validated by period testing and engineering rigor. It also laid the groundwork for what came next. The Firehawk name would return in the 4th generation and beyond, becoming far more familiar in the 1990s and early 2000s. But those later cars, impressive as they were, never quite captured the same sense of rebellion. The original Firehawk wasn't just fast, it was defiant. It proved that the Firebird platform still had teeth, even at the end of its life cycle. And more importantly, it showed what could happen when passion, engineering talent, and a little rule-bending came together at exactly the right moment. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of GM's most rebellious creations, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories about the rare, the misunderstood, and the cars that broke the rules. Because sometimes the most interesting legends are the ones history almost forgot.